Hello, everyone. My name is Lauren Hawker-Zafthor, and I'm your podcast host today on Redefining AI. Redefining AI is a podcast hosted by Squirrel and the Squirrel Academy. The podcast focuses on key narratives and discussions that drive digital innovation and help people understand artificial intelligence, machine learning, insight engines in the insight era. In this particular episode, From Cognitive Search to Insights, we're really happy to welcome back Dr. Moritz Müller. Moritz heads the Squirrel office in Singapore and is responsible for the APAC market. As the former head of product, he still works closely with the product management team here at Squirrel. Now, Moritz appeared on Redefining AI on episode 1, where he helped our listeners to recognise what an insight engine is. Today, he will start to further bolster our own understanding of the technical roads travelled from cognitive search to insights. But before we invite Moritz into the conversation, I want to start by setting the scene a little. Search, enterprise search, cognitive search are all terms that have left us all doing just that, searching, in more ways than one, searching for information and searching for answers. After all, being able to search and also use search queries to identify search trends is a fascinating technical capability. Search gives us a unique look at what the world is actually searching for and what it seeks to understand better. The technology and data methodologies allow us then to look back at searches and identify patterns that reflect moments or illuminate experiences that help us all as individuals to understand issues that society is confronted with or events and narratives that matter most to us. Now, search has progressed over the last few years dramatically. Many companies are attempting to produce improved language models so that the models can enable more contextual and meaning-based matches of documents to user queries, which are not keyword-based. So if search and its advancement are breaking down all barriers to accessing information, how is this affecting professional ecosystems? Welcome back, Moritz.
Thank you, Lauren, for inviting me back to your podcast. It is really a pleasure and also an honor to be part of the show again. I have followed your past episode, and I must say that I'm really impressed by the guests that you had, and I personally have also learned a lot from those discussions. So it's really good to be back.
Excellent. Yeah, it's great to have you here, and I'm looking forward to this discussion as well. I've personally learned a lot from yourself too, so I'm sure that we can pass on a lot of new information to our listeners here today. So, Moritz, I introduced 3 terms at the start of this podcast, and I want to focus on those in relation to how search is affecting corporate ecosystems. And I think really here to be able to seal the fundament, what should we as listeners understand from the terms search, enterprise search, and cognitive search, especially now in 2022? And maybe as a follow-up to that thread, why are we focusing on cognitive search today?
That's a good question. And I always also try to clarify these terms before we start, for instance, discussions with our clients to explore use cases around the topic of search. For me, we typically structure this all under the term cognitive search nowadays. It was Gardner that framed the term cognitive search. You will also see in the past there are cognitive search solutions out there. And under the term cognitive search fall all the respective solutions. It can start with basic search solutions. So these could be, for instance, website search solutions, where you have website content that you want to make searchable. Then this can be in an enterprise context, enterprise search solutions, where you try to provide search on top of different data silos. and it can go into the direction of knowledge management, where you want to guarantee that all the knowledge that is available within an organization, for instance, is accessible, can be found. These can be, for instance, PDF documents, can be Office documents, PPTX, Word, and so on and so forth. I think we are all familiar with the struggle of accessing and finding helpful information, so that all falls into that category of cognitive search. Top level part is cognitive search. Below that, we have respective solutions from website search, enterprise search, knowledge management solutions, and so on and so forth.
Okay. I mean, you've mentioned there, and it's one thing that I've myself taken from that definition. And it's maybe from the respect of me looking at maybe a problem that cognitive search is addressing in itself. You mentioned that there is this struggle of accessing information. And maybe I've understood this from the need for quick information that's certainly been heightened by the emergence of a lot of sophisticated search engines, and maybe users demand more information in shorter periods of times and they can't access the information. Is that the problem that cognitive search is addressing, or what exactly is cognitive search addressing as a pain point in an organization?
I think fundamentally it is the solution on how to access information. Let's say you need to find something about a specific client, customer of yours. You need to find some information about regulations. You need to find information about a product, or you just want to understand what is the research that has been done on a specific topic. So from that point of view, it is clearly the solution to find information. But when we talk about finding information, then cognitive search, and that is the reason why Gardner has introduced the term cognitive, so the cognition of the concepts of what you search for. Nowadays, it's extremely important to understand not only the keywords that you search for, but to have technologies that allow you to get contextual information. And that is, for me, the main differentiator of the cognitive search solutions that are around nowadays, that they really try, and they are successful in doing so, in surfacing more relevant information that with a single keyword search and hit, you would not find otherwise.
Okay. Can you go into expanding on those technologies? I mean, from what I'm understanding, it's more of an aim to maybe enable contextual and semantic search, or am I can you highlight the technologies?
Absolutely. I will try to keep it a bit on a high level because we could talk probably for hours about the respective technologies for this. So let's focus on some key concepts. It is obvious that machine learning and natural language processing are key technologies that are nowadays used. Overall, you have also heard about semantic search. We at Squirrel are at the moment investing a lot in providing semantic search capabilities. We work with our clients to try to provide a lot of this out of the box, because in the past, too much time has been spent on customizing this. There will still be some customization done, but we try to push more and more into the product. And out of the box, you find synonyms, for instance. Synonym matching can be done with different approaches. You can have a predefined list, of course, when you say, I have a synonym list where I know that my product is addressed with different terms. Ideally, of course, for the more generic terms, you want to guarantee that you have models that can understand them. A good example for this is our current unfortunate pandemic situation. If you search for coronavirus, you also want to receive or get search results back that do not mention the word corona, but actually the word COVID or COVID-19. So those things are easily available out of the box, and they can quickly be delivered with out-of-the-box models, but also quickly customized if this is needed to a specific product context also. That is just the context of synonyms. I think it also goes into a relevance component nowadays. You do not only want to get results where there is a keyword match. You also want to have some relevant sorting in terms of get it results, where the terms is mentioned more often, where it's mentioned potentially already in a title. All of those things are nowadays handled as part of a so-called search ranking, that the results that are ideally more relevant to you are showing up before results that are not that relevant.
And is this addressing another issue in itself? Why is this important to the end user? And can you give me maybe an outline of a typical end user that this would be of importance to?
Absolutely. So I think all of us are very familiar and used to using Google. I think Google is a completely different setup. Google has access to much more information. But we are familiar with having search results presented to us in a specific way. We try to imitate parts of those things with our solution, but in an enterprise context, meaning that we source the respective search results out of the enterprise data that is available to us. So there we need to account for this. And a typical user would, for instance, go in and search for a client. Then you want to automatically address all the data that is being related to that client. And there could, for instance, be that you have an internal proposal document, which is not necessarily containing the client name, but it is stored in a folder that relates to that client. Because not all the data and information that we have necessarily contain client or product names. They might be stored in a product folder. What we can do with cognitive search is we inherit that information from, for instance, the storage location, and then we enrich it. So it's tagged with this information, and the moment you search for client A, you automatically also get the respective proposal documents or other related documents that do not immediately contain the client name, but you at least find all this information.
Excellent, yeah. So how would I go about enabling that in my own organization?
That's a good question. Typically, we want to work very closely with existing IT departments. The companies that we work with are normally having a certain size of employees. So we have internal IT that helps us. Of course, we enable this also as a SaaS solution that you can, for instance, quickly connect. With Query, you can connect relatively easily a Dropbox folder, a Google Drive folder, but you will find that more in smaller organizations. There it's extremely easy to set this up, and then you can provide a respective server. You have a service agreement that handles respective data safety. That can be done for smaller organizations. For the mid-sized companies, so the bigger ones, we work extremely closely with the IT departments to understand what is the data infrastructure they already have. Is there, for instance, a data lake? Is there already an effort to combine all the respective data lakes or the respective data silos into an internal data lake where you can pre-enrich the data with an existing taxonomy? We try to leverage these internal efforts and then sit on top of this respective data lake to provide the search experience. And the steps that are needed to be done to enrich the data and the information, they can either happen with our solution, or we use the pre-enriched data that is part of the system. So it is very important that companies are thinking about this. We support this. We help them to understand what is needed in terms of data readiness, what is the system of record, and what is the respective taxonomy that should be used. And as part of this discussion, it is not only key to include IT, but we want to make sure that as early as possible, we can include the final end users. So in that sense, the business, to guarantee that we make sure when we enrich the data, we speak the same language as they do. Let's say if they have a certain taxonomy that they use for their products, we want to guarantee that we use this the moment we load the data, because you can imagine very much that the moment you speak the same language and you have the same terms, you make the solution much more usable and much more user-friendly for the users. And that is exactly what we want to achieve.
Mm-hmm. And is this easy to do? Or have you had any complications or challenges that come with speaking the same language?
So of course we are facing certain challenges like any IT project. I mean, I'm not talking about change management within an organization. And what we have seen is that a lot of the users that we involve in the early project phases, test users for instance, they have a very clear idea of how they want to improve their search experience internally. They tell us immediately, look, all the products that I have, for instance, for this specific category, I want to have a quick link button to this. I want to be able to filter down immediately with this product category. And this is how we learn. This is how we make our search much more user-friendly. We try to integrate it in existing solutions. And by existing solutions, I mean, it can be a CRM system where you have all your client information anyways if you search it. It can be even a SharePoint page. If you have information stored on SharePoint, you can, with a few clicks, integrate with the information from SharePoint, and then you integrate again your cognitive search solution into your SharePoint page, for instance. This is very easy to do, and having users on board that give you early feedback allows you to deliver a much more successful product. In terms of taxonomy, I think it is also important that we educate our clients that this is something that they should maintain together with the business. It's not necessarily helpful if we come in externally and we tell them, look, this is the taxonomy that you want to use. My experience clearly shows that companies, of course, have common terms that they use, but every business unit has their own taxonomy and classification of clients, products, topics they discuss, and it is very helpful for us that we can accommodate for these custom client-specific taxonomies in our product.
Mm-hmm. And what do you mean specifically by they should maintain it with the business?
Yeah, that's definitely a challenge. So what I mean with that is it is always work to maintain a taxonomy, but it's always very helpful when you search for information. And I think it starts with the fact that when we store information, I think even so nowadays we have a search bar where you just can type in information, and cognitive search can do this. Cognitive search, for instance, when you have type ahead functionalities, will try to auto-suggest certain terms that you search for. That's extremely helpful. Mm-hmm. But if you want to, for instance, tag information, and by tagging information, help also the machine to understand how data is related, then you can very much look at this like you store all the client information in a specific folder. That's the same way, the same kind of discipline that is needed to do this. Instead of just throwing everything on our desktop, for instance, you throw it in a specific client folder, because then you know all the client information is going to be in that folder. The same happens with the taxonomy. You should make sure that you have an agreed taxonomy, because otherwise your users, someone gives it this name to a client, the other one gives this name to a client. We have had client projects where there were internally 3 different spellings used for client names. Someone added the private limited in the end, someone did not. And you can imagine in a search bar, when you search for company, let's say Apple, and you search for Apple, and we suggest, for instance, 3 tags like Apple, Apple Inc., Apple Corp, or Apple Private Limited. That can be super confusing for a user. So when I speak about maintaining this, I mean that there should be a common understanding of a taxonomy, so that you keep that lean. You can always expand it. You can always adapt it. But it is in the interest of the users and also of the business to have someone who owns this and who looks after it.
Mm-hmm. And who would that person normally be?
These can be different persons. I think it is important that this comes from the business. We are not normally in a position that we decide this. We try to advise on this. My experience shows me that sometimes business looks at IT to maintain this, but I don't think it is good practice to have a developer defining which are the categories that the business is using. So ideally, this is a function that is in between. And because this is a function that is in between, it is important that we make the management of this as easy as possible. And in the long term, and I don't want to go into detail now because then we will be sidetracked, all of this kind of taxonomy discussion will be part of the so-called knowledge graphs that you will be seeing popping up left and right going forward. Whenever Google answers, for instance, a question inside of their search, they use this kind of graph database that they have behind, so where they understand the relationship. This is one of the things that nowadays we have part of our solution as well. So there is more and more of this is automated, but it's still important that someone looks over this and guarantees that this is in line with what the business is doing.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we can then move on to the scope of cognitive search. I mean, there's certain features and functionalities that we've touched upon, and I'm sure that in the implementation, there's always desires and wishes, but unknowns. So maybe you can give us a little bit more of an insight as to the scope of cognitive search and what's actually plausible and possible.
Yeah, so the scope of cognitive search depends a bit on the use case. We looked at this at the beginning of our discussion where we said we have website search, for instance, we have knowledge management, we have enterprise search. A website search or a search for any kind of information has a very clear objective. You need to surface information. When it becomes more specific, for instance, for enterprise search, you want to guarantee that you can search for clients and the data is then tagged. Potentially have a client 360 search dashboard where you get all the client respective information. You can drill then deeper, have additional filters. If you look at website search, you will very often find that the filter options are, for instance, limited. It is really purely about pointing you to the potentially right websites. For enterprise search solution, these filters can become relatively complex. You can say, I want to have all the information about client A. It should be this and that project, context in that time period, and these people need to have been part of the discussions. So we can be much more granular in the filters that we define. And then if you make cognitive search part of your enterprise search solution or even use it for knowledge management, it is also key that you inform users about new content on your platform. Mm-hmm. So at Squirrel, our solutions, for instance, have out-of-the-box notification functionalities. Let's say you are generally subscribing to a certain topic. You are working for a company, let's say, again, sorry to fall back on this, but let's look at Apple. You are interested in the iPhone. You want to subscribe to every new content that is published about a phone or a MacBook. And this can be automatically surfaced for you. You can get a notification. You can even save certain searches that you have done in the past, or you see historic searches that you have done. And then the system informs you, oh, there's new content popping up that fits exactly your past search terms last week. This is the kind of functionality that we want to enhance. Because ideally you can move away a bit from search towards a state where you're proactively informed about the things that you need to, let's say, monitor, like your clients, the product you're responsible for. So cognitive search solutions nowadays try to fulfill this requirement.
And do you feel that they're fulfilling it well, and that the knowledge worker, him or herself, are gelling with the actual functionalities that are being offered there that you've listed, especially the notifications that are popping up that are giving them an indication? Let's say I was a risk manager, I want to be informed about maybe new bankruptcy risks. Would that work in the same sense?
So, of course, technically, if you know it works, use it. And I think all of us are familiar with notification functionalities. Mm-hmm. The key challenge that I see, and maybe for me this is also a lot of personal experience, I feel I'm getting notified about too many things. And that might be relevant in a marketing, advertising aspect. You want to push it out, just try your luck. Mm-hmm. When we do this for knowledge management and for enterprise solutions, our target is not to sell something internally, but really make the best use of the time of our knowledge workers and employees.
Excellent.
So we need to guarantee that the time they spend on consuming information is well spent. So our solutions allow you to focus on this, to subscribe to this. Of course, when I talk to internal and product managers at our clients, they also want to push their content. They have that option. But it is clearly something that, like with any product, you need to keep it meaningful. We know that technically we can achieve it. It is then more of the responsibility of the internal product owner who owns cognitive search of how aggressive they want to push out information.
No, it's fine. I mean, I was just going to say, do you think that that is maybe the core element in increasing adoption of cognitive search in an enterprise? Keeping it meaningful. I mean, you're talking about keeping it meaningful.
Absolutely. Keeping solutions and information that you push out to users meaningful is key to this. At the moment you have users on our platform and they understand they save a lot of time searching for information and getting access to information, they will come back because, first of all, we need to give them the feeling that they find everything that they were used to find at 10 different places before. So now instead of having to go to 10 different places, SharePoint, your mails, your internal forum, your websites, whatever it is, you have to search for the information on all of these platforms. We try to solve this, or we are solving this by connecting to all of this and putting one search above this all. This is what cognitive search does or enterprise search does. Mm-hmm. Now, imagine you get the feeling as a user that you find the information now and you find it actually faster than before because you only need to go to one place. I think it speaks for itself that users will come back. And also when you then understand, you have that taxonomy that we talked about before. You understand that the data is correctly tagged. You can subscribe to everything about a product. You can subscribe to everything about a specific client or a specific topic. Then this gives you the feeling you are informed about it. Mm-hmm. You might learn much earlier about certain developments inside of the company. I mean, of course, it can also be from external information. But ideally, at the end of the day, and we know that we have done these studies with our clients, we know that people are spending much more time on relevant information than just searching for information. So they have much more time to process the data and do their actual job than for searching for information. And this is one of the key selling points for me for cognitive search. I think every company nowadays should have a cognitive search solution and even a knowledge management solution because it will pay off. You see even new roles popping up at companies. Recently, I talked to someone who is really just responsible for doing knowledge management within the company. If you see that those roles are popping up, that shows clearly to us that our clients are also realizing the potential of what cognitive search can give to them.
Okay. And what would be the success metric there? You've mentioned obviously the time that's saved. Is that the key success metric? I mean, obviously as maybe an organization, I want to ensure that I'm getting return on my investment.
Of course, you want to get a return on your investment. I think save time is definitely one of the key measures that KPIs that you can define for measuring the return on investment. I think also adoption rate is very important. Mm-hmm. We do not want to have a solution where 1,000 users have access to, but we want to rather have a solution that is used by all the users that have access to it, because that shows the value. So that's one of the things we typically want to measure. And then we have different means of increasing the engagement levels that we see with users. It can be that we integrate with chat forums, that you can share information much more easily. You can potentially annotate information and on a cognitive search solution and store that additional information, or you can bookmark it. And ideally, even in the next step, and I think we're going to talk about this, is then imagine you can automate part of the search efforts that you do by the fact that the machine is automatically extracting and informing you about key concepts that you would be looking for inside of the information that you're searching for.
Yeah, definitely. I wanted to actually move on to that there. I mean, our discussion today is about the journey from cognitive search to insights. So maybe you can take us into the environment of automation and getting a little bit of return on your insights.
Yeah, happy to look at this. Maybe just a question to you, and it's potentially a trick question. What are insights for you? What do you define insights as? Because nowadays we talk a lot about insights, and I'm happy to explain a bit what I consider this to be. But I would maybe just hear from you one sentence. How would you define it for yourself?
That is an interesting question. I mean, I think that for me, looking at it from the perspective of search and searching for something, an insight would be a piece of information that enhances my understanding more than I actually would have understood at the start.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you bring it very much to the point. I like that definition of insights. For me, it can have different facets in the sense there are different definitions of what insights are. In the context of the use cases that we discuss, for me, insights are actually relevant information. And not just being informed that there are now 20 new news articles speaking about a new product. That is something that might be relevant. I still need to take the time to dig through that information. What we want to make sure with insights is that we know that within these 20 articles, there are actually concepts being discussed that are relevant for your work. So let's say you are responsible, for instance, as a product manager for a specific product. Then we want to automatically highlight to you not only that there are now a number of news articles that speak about similar products, but we want to potentially highlight to you what are the new features that they have about connectivity, about notification functionalities. So those concepts can be defined. We can build classification models with that. Mm-hmm. And then we can highlight to you, say, look, as part of your work, you are interested in the technical features like connectivity. These are all the statements or paragraphs that talk about connectivity. This is what is relevant for you. And maybe just another analogy for this, when we look, for instance, I work with a lot of banking clients. Let's say they are interested to monitor, for instance, their risks. I mean, in COVID times, it has been a huge discussion to monitor risks. Recently, with the unfortunate situation in Ukraine, people wanted to understand. They spend a lot of time understanding what is their exposure to all the sanctions, mm-hmm. to all the other credit risks that they have, for instance, about Ukraine. And these are the things that you can automate. You can, for instance, automate that you get highlighted all the statements that talk about sanctions. You get information then not only that there is somewhere a news article that talks about sanctions, but we flag to you the information that there is a news article that talks about your client in the context of sanctions. Because then it becomes relevant for you. Then it's not just one other data information piece that you need to process, but part of the processing is done already by by our insights engine. It's trying to understand this. And the interesting part for me is, I think that we can help a lot of our clients with predefined models that we have. But the cool part is that this can be relatively quickly customized to the users. So we spend typically a workshop or two with the business to understand what are the things they're looking for. And it can be anything, right? It can be, as I described, from knowledge workers trying to monitor certain technological concepts, over the risk monitoring in finance. It can go, imagine you want to do sales. You are selling forklifters, for instance, for a logistic company. We can highlight to you all the statements in news that talk about companies trying to or intending to build new warehouses. You immediately know this is an insight state. The insight to you is that there is a company having an activity wanting to build a new warehouse. This is an insight that you need for your business because you're in the business of selling forklifters. And these are the kind of insights that we can extremely quickly customize. And this is the additional value that you get on top of cognitive search.
Okay, so the customization is then what makes it relevant for you. I mean, going back to your original definition of what an insight is, you're talking about relevant information. So this customization of the automation, that's what makes it relevant, is it?
That is what makes it even more relevant.
Mm-hmm.
We already see that a lot of the predefined models that we have, right, they are already helpful, because especially when you look, for instance, for risks in a banking context, those risks are relatively clear, well defined, right? They're predefined. We know what this talks about. The customization makes it even more relevant because you have then an individual solution. If you go to an external news website, they will tell you, oh, there is a sanction. But we relate it to the client. So we know which is the client of yours, because as part of the cognitive search, you have the taxonomy. The taxonomy is applied to the data, and then you know this is actually affecting my client. So the moment you know the information is relevant to you, that's the moment that we consider it an actual insight.
Excellent. So in terms of implementation, so we're going from cognitive search to insights. What's needed to go or take that step?
Yes. So as you know, typically we try to start off with cognitive search because we believe connecting data sources is step one.
Mm-hmm.
The next step, generating these insights, is for me step two. Often, of course, you want to, when you talk to business product owners, they want to achieve insights, but we want to make sure that cognitive search is something that is to be done on the way to getting there. The customization of the models are actually not taking that much time. The moment we have established the framework, we are connected to the respective data sources. We have established the taxonomy, and we can help with that. But it's important. It's important to have the taxonomy, because if you have a coherent and reliable taxonomy, the insights engine is able to extract relevant insights much better than when you just give it some random information that is not directly related to, for instance, a client. And we have tools nowadays available. Here at Scuro, we have a tool available that allows you to quickly label, for instance, data, to do the model building with a business analyst. You can then stepwise refine that further and further. You can bring your own data scientists into the equation. You can use models that you already have. The nice part is that as part of our solution, we give you the whole infrastructure and framework to roll out those models and apply them to your actual business data in absolutely no time. So that is really the lesson learned on why we have been able to roll out this kind of insight solution much faster than this was possible in the past. Yeah,
God, I can imagine. I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate as we're sort of ushering towards the end of our conversation. Why not start directly with insights? Why not step two before step one?
Yeah, that is a good question. And it links a bit to what I said before. We can start off with having some objectives to generate insights as early as possible. You can imagine if a machine needs to guarantee, for instance, that data, and we define insights as being data being relevant in the context of your client. So what machines need for that, they need to understand that the data relates to your client. And technically that translates into data being tagged to your client. So all the respective enrichment and technical steps that we need to do to set up the insights generation are part of the steps that we need to do for delivering a cognitive search solution. Because cognitive search solutions rely on data being tagged. This is for us prerequisite for our insights generation journey, let's call it that way. So that's why we typically try to advise saying, let's take a stepwise approach. We completely understand that for the business, the insights piece is more valuable. It has even a higher return on investment. But the cognitive search step part is absolutely relevant and a prerequisite to deliver this.
So how do you measure that return of investment there? I mean, you've mentioned that it's higher, but how's it measured?
That's a good question, especially since we are dealing with unstructured data. It is not always easy, and it's one of the biggest struggles that we had in the past, because everyone talks nowadays about AI, be it being augmented intelligence, be it artificial intelligence, whatever it is. You can definitely measure the user engagement. You can measure the time being saved, and you can measure the information that is being surfaced with insights engines. And for instance, and maybe I need to bridge that bit the gap to what we do in terms of sales related insights, our sales insight solution. There we could clearly measure of how many sales relevant triggers we could pull up as our sales insight solution. There you can directly measure it. You can say you generate a number of leads and opportunities that later on lead to a deal. That is easy. For risk, you can say, look, we detected a number of events as part of this. For me, this is often a combination between the time being saved and the respective events being discovered. And the events being discovered, they can, of course, be then translated to return on investment. If you look at the risk side, they can be translated to a respective risk that is potentially being reduced. For the sales side, of course, into additional revenue generated. On the service side, to the client satisfaction and potentially the turnaround time for service tickets. There are different ways of measuring return on investments. For me personally, besides all the financial aspects, it's the engagement level. I want to make sure that our users use our solution, because only if users use our solution, we know that we actually generate value. Of course, we also want to see the return of investment later on the spreadsheet, saying this is the money that we generated or saved. But the biggest satisfaction comes from, and we see that left and right, from users using the dashboards, the search functionality, the insights part. And the moment you have these engaged users, they come back with feature requests. They want to automate it even further. And that is really interesting. And I think we should not touch on this now, but normally when we speak about this, we say cognitive search, then insights, and finally recommendations. And recommendations, in order to deliver recommendations, you really need to have understood how the business works and how the information is linked up together to get the next level of value.
Excellent. That's really, really insightful. I mean, I can see that the benefits are multifaceted there. And I definitely think that as well a key metric of success is engagement in any software implementation. Maybe next time we can look at recommendations together, Moritz, because it is unfortunate that we're going to have to start to usher our discussion to a close. Is there anything that you feel you've not said that you'd like to share today in our journey from cognitive search to insights?
I think we have spoken about a lot. There's one take-home message for me that I want to share with your audience or with our audience, and this is that whenever you look at cognitive search or an enterprise search solution or a knowledge management solution, I really encourage you to not only look at solving the problem of search, but also think about how you can automate this. Because the initial step of setting up cognitive search will be coming with some pain points with IT involvement and so on and so forth. But if you want to achieve insights, then when you have established cognitive search, you're probably already 80% there. Delivering the additional insights once you have the data tagged with the right taxonomy and so on and so forth. This final last step is much smaller than you imagine. So, and the return on investments once you have this is then also significantly higher. So it's always worth looking into this next step. Yeah, and that's maybe what I want to give to the audience. Look at this.
Excellent. I can recommend it too. So thank you, Moritz, and I want to thank you for listening today, everyone. If you'd like to find out more about Squirrel in the Insight Engine, then go to the Squirrel Academy on learn.squirrel.com and access our educational material. Thank you.